Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are going to go ahead and get started in just a moment as folks continue to trickle in. Um, in the meantime, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat where you're calling in from, and we will get going in just a moment. Alrighty, we can go ahead and get going. So welcome everyone to our deep dive webinar on effective state level EV charging policy. We are going to go ahead and get started with a bit of an introduction. We can go to the next slide. My name is Kristen Suarez. If this is your first time, my pronouns are she, they. I'm the State Climate Policy Network Manager here at Climate Exchange. I'm going to go ahead and send a little link in the chat so that if it's your first time, you can learn more about what we do on our website. Um, but yeah, on the next slide, just a little intro. Climate Exchange is a national organization focused on passing effective and equitable climate policy at the state level. And the State Climate Policy Network, or the SCPN, is one of our main national programs for supporting state work. So we're a network of over 15,000 advocates, legislators, researchers, government officials, all sorts of folks working in and around state level climate policy across all 50 states. And if you go to that climate-exchange.org/network, you can see other ways that we can support your work, virtual programming, recap articles from past webinars, blog posts on policy developments, things like that. But this webinar is part of our roughly monthly deep dive webinar series where we delve into a specific topic relevant to state climate policy and invite experts to share their experience and knowledge on those topics. And through all of our events, which are all virtual and free, we really hope to create a space for state climate policy actors across the country to connect with each other, learn from best practices, and the like. And you can feel free to reach out to me at kristen@climate-exchange.org if you would like to learn more. Um, on the next slide, just a couple ways that we can help support you in your work, or we can connect you to someone who can. Climate Exchange specializes in tracking and analyzing state climate policy, as well as providing connections with experts, advocates, or other actors working on similar issues to you. So we can provide example policies for any sort of lots of climate mitigation related policies across sectors. We can do landscape analyses for your state, all sorts of things. We also host the State Climate Policy Dashboard, which I just sent in the chat, which is a free online database with over 60 different types of climate policies as enacted across all 50 states. So that is that. We can go to the next slide. And the last sort of plug before we get into this is our annual fundraiser. So our work is made possible through our largest fundraiser of the year, which is our annual EV raffle, on theme for today's topic. But this year we have two ticket options to win your own electric vehicle. If you're looking to go electric, but you're not interested in a luxury vehicle, we're hosting an affordable mini raffle where our winner can choose any EV on the market up to $45,000. And as in years past, we're also hosting a luxury EV raffle where our grand prize winner can choose any EV up to $120,000. Plus, we cover all the taxes on the winning cars. And yeah, your support makes our work possible. We actually only have 4 days left in the raffle. So if you want to get your tickets, we have just over half of our tickets sold, so your odds of winning are better than ever. And yeah, you can learn more about the raffle at carbonraffle.org, which I just sent in the chat. And don't hesitate to reach out with any questions. So yeah, next slide. Today we have a great lineup of speakers to dive into EV charging policy. This webinar is being co-hosted with Plug in America, so we have two of their amazing policy experts to talk about EV charging today. And before I get into an introduction of those folks, I'm just going to say, as with all of our events, this webinar is being recorded. So if you have to hop off at any time or you know someone who wanted to make it but couldn't, we will be sharing the recording and slides and a little recap article via email by the end of the week. So yeah, we'll get into the discussion. Today we're going to start with an introduction from our own policy and research director here at Climate Exchange, Jordan Giroux, to sort of set the stage for why state level EV charging policy is a key topic for this current moment. And then we'll hand it over to Alexia Melendez-Martineau and Jess Senger from Plug in America to dive into more specifics, including the federal EV charging landscape, as well as state and local examples of effective public charging policy and multifamily charging initiatives. And then we'll have hopefully 5-10 minutes at the end for answering a couple questions through Q&A. So feel free at any point in the webinar to drop any of your questions into that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, which is a little box with a question mark. And we will try to get to those. So I am going to go ahead and hand it over to Jordan for a little bit of that setting the stage, and then we'll hand it over to Plug in America. So thanks, Jordan. We can go to the next slide.
Thank you, Kristen. So go ahead and hop to the next slide. I'm just providing a little bit of context about why Climate Exchange is so concerned with this space in 2025. And really, when we look at what's occurred in terms of federal rollbacks, no sector has been as affected as transportation. And at the same time, a lot of state policymakers and advocates don't appreciate all of the ways that states can really help pave the way for this transition to continue. So next slide. Just a little survey of what we've been seeing and responding to coming out of the federal administration this year. Of course, you might be aware, California had its waivers under the Clean Air Act ostensibly revoked. That is, California's permissions to exceed federal standards for emissions on vehicles was revoked by Congress through a series of resolutions. I will say that California contests the constitutionality of those resolutions, and those cases are still in court. So if you are from one of the 17 states that followed California's lead into this space, hold out a little hope for that to resolve. We've also seen the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, of course, ending tax credits for EVs new and used. EPA is also considering backsliding on its emissions regulations for vehicles themselves, the multi-pollutant rule, the heavy-duty vehicle phase 3 rule, and the heavy-duty NOx rule. Those were announced back in March, and we're still waiting on responsive proposals, but we know they're coming. And just yesterday, the National Highway and Transportation Safety Administration released a new proposal rolling back corporate average fuel economy standards. After this summer, Congress already removed the penalties for those standards. So the CAFE program is a little toothless at this moment, but even so, the proposal from yesterday was surprising, I would say. Next slide. Just because this was in the news yesterday, we decided to give you a little bit of context on this one. If you look at the numbers that EPA proposed, I'm sorry, that NHTSA proposed yesterday for corporate average fuel economy, you might say, wow, those look like they're 15 years out of date. And indeed, they're just about 15 years out of date if you compare them against what was proposed for 2012 to 2016 standards. Those 2027 to 2031 standards are all moving in the same range. So that sets an interesting conversation around whether or not these will be legally challenged. Are these truly the maximum feasible CAFE standards in this decade? But we're keeping our eye on that space. Next slide. So throughout all of this, we have been heartened to see states continuing to take action to fill the gaps. We are seeing states taking action on tax incentives and rebates. We are seeing states take action on government procurement, getting their own fleets in on the EV transition. We're seeing states take action on low carbon fuel standards. That is, regulating the carbon intensity of what you put in the gas tank. If you can't regulate what comes out of the tailpipe, you can still regulate what goes into the gas tank. As well as some emerging areas like indirect source review, looking at, for example, how warehouses are permitted if you know they're going to attract a lot of vehicular traffic. So for more information on all of that panoply of different ways states are trying to fill the gap, I would point you towards a webinar we did a little bit earlier this year on state gap filling strategies, linked here and also on our website. I see Kristen popping it into the chat. I was so heartened when I was putting together this slide, though I must say, because all of these maps from our state climate policy dashboard had to be updated because we are continuing to see states adopt these policies throughout 2025. Next slide. And of course, why we brought you here today, perhaps no area of state policy is as critical to get right as the EV charging network. We are seeing the price of these vehicles come very close to gas-powered vehicles. In fact, the all-in cost of ownership of an EV often is lower than the all-in cost of ownership of gas-powered vehicles. If we can get the charging network right, no amount of federal malfeasance is going to be able to stop this transition. We are, of course, very interested here in policies that intersect with electric rates and electric utility regulation. So we call out a few of those on our dashboard as well. But there is a panoply of different policies that the state and local governments can get right to accelerate the EV charging network build out. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our folks at Plug in America to cover those.
Yeah, so we can go to the next slide and I'll give a little bit of an introduction to our two Plug in America speakers. So, Alexia is the Senior Policy Manager for Plug in America. She brings a diverse set of experiences across clean energy and transportation, climate change mitigation, campaign management, and corporate engagement. Most recently, Alexia led strategic communications and engagement for a global EV corporate initiative that requires companies to transition their fleets to electric or install charging to build out the EV charging network. And then we also have Jess Sanger, who's a policy research associate with Plug in America. She graduated with a degree in environmental science from the University of Chicago and strives to use research and data analysis to create practical and actionable policy solutions. Previously, Jess has completed policy research on species conservation, climate change adaptation, and electric school buses. So we have set the stage with Jordan, and now I'm going to hand it over to Alexia and Jess. Thanks so much for being here. And yeah, take it away with Plug in America's great insights and resources.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kristen and Jordan. Really appreciate that introduction. And Jordan, the level setting was exactly right for what we're, hoping to talk to everyone about today. I won't spend too much time on this slide. We can go to the next slide. We have a pretty packed agenda for you all today. We're hoping to do a little bit of level setting around Charging 101 information, assuming that many of you already have some, if not all of this information, but making sure we're on the same page. We'll go through some of the kind of federal landscape pieces that complement what Jordan was sharing. And then we'll dive a little bit deeper into state and local initiatives that are being undertaken at this moment and in the future to advance EV charging deployment. Lastly, Jess will cover a huge section around multifamily housing charging infrastructure and various options and solutions to make sure that all drivers have access to EV charging. And we'll close out with a small section on additional resources and a Q&A to make sure that you have all the information that you need moving forward, because we know it'll be hopefully a good conversation today, but definitely just an introduction to deeper conversations. So I will actually pass it to Jess to cover the next slide.
Yeah, we can go to the next slide. Thanks. Hi, everybody. Good to be here today. Just going to quickly introduce Plug in America. We're a national nonprofit that has been working for over 16 years to accelerate EV adoption through education, advocacy, and research. And we work to educate consumers and dealers about EVs through things like blogs, articles, ride and drive events, and dealer trainings. And we participate in policy advocacy at the federal and state levels, as well as through utility proceedings. And we conduct consumer research of EV drivers and intenders through our annual EV driver survey. And we go to the next slide, and I'll pass back to Alexia.
So for just a little bit of Charging 101, as I mentioned, we're imagining that many of you might already be experts in this space, but we wanted to just level set to make sure we're on the same page. We could go to the next slide, please. There are three main categories for EV charging. Level 1 charging is most often located at home. This allows EV drivers to plug in just using a standard wall outlet. And overnight, it can provide about 40 miles of range, which is also the average distance an American driver covers in a day, meaning that level 1 solutions can support a wide range of use cases. Level 2 charging is faster than level 1 charging, as the name might imply, and it is used widely both at home and in public locations where the car is sitting for a couple of hours. With level 2 charging, you can charge to full in about 4 to 8 hours, making it a really good fit for overnight charging or public charging. And then we have DC fast charging, which is the fastest speed charging available for passenger car drivers and enables faster charging in public. With DCFC, drivers can charge to about 80% in about half an hour, depending on your vehicle. And DCFC is a really great fit for longer distance travel or quick top-offs when drivers are out and about. And more than 80% of EV drivers actually charge at home. And most drivers only use fast charging on road trips or longer distance travel. So just putting that into context and how you might want to think about matching your charging to the use cases that drivers need. Especially because these higher speeds do come at a higher cost to both the operator and the driver, meaning that DCFC should be considered as a supplemental solution for home charging and definitely not a full replacement. So moving into the next slide, we wanted to also highlight a little bit of the difference in costs between home and public charging when you're just talking about level 2 charging. And access to charging is one of the main considerations for potential and current EV drivers, making it a really key area to make sure that we can continue to advance EV adoption. And you can see from this itemized list of costs associated with installing and operating home charging versus public charging, that public charging costs are much more to install and maintain, with the typical cost of a level 2 public charging system anywhere from $3,600 to $32,000, in comparison to a home charging system at level 2 speeds, where the typical cost is anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000. So a really big difference in cost there. And when you're thinking about these costs, they're passed along to EV drivers in the public domain, resulting in more expensive charging costs when you're charging out in public. And so we say this again to highlight the importance of home charging solutions wherever possible. So on the next slide, we'll start to think about some of the federal EV charging landscape so that you can better understand what might already be coming your way to your community and what's currently available at the federal level to support EV charging development. And I'll pass it to Jess to cover the next few slides.
Yeah, so on the next slide, so the largest federal investment in EV charging to date that you may have heard from came from the National EV Infrastructure Program, which is also known as NEVI. And it was created through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and it provides $7.5 billion to build out EV charging. $5 billion of this goes to states to build chargers along highways, which are referred to as alternative fuel corridors. And through this program, states are required to submit plans for program compliance each year. And once they identify potential charging sites, they take bids from charging companies and hosts, and then announce awards for the final sites. And the other $2.5 billion of this original funding was intended for community charging, but that project has largely been stalled currently, unfortunately. And the NEVI program was designed to be a 5-year program to account for the contracting, planning, design, engineering, permitting, equipment procurement, and installation of EV charging, all of which take a long time to go through. And currently, 17 states have at least one operational station, and 4,000 DC fast charging ports have been funded in total. So those 4,000 are caught up in the process before they're operational. 96 stations are operational, and 6 states have reached fully built out status, which means that the state has received enough funding to build chargers along most interstates at a maximum of 50 miles apart. And once they've reached this milestone, the state can use remaining funding to build DC fast chargers and level 2 chargers throughout the state, wherever they want to put them. And we can go to the next slide. So the NEVI program has gone through some changes since it was first created in 2021. There's been a lot of change this year with the program specifically. So again, we just talked about in November 2021, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law is signed, creating the NEVI program. This year in February, the Federal Highway Administration ordered state departments of transportation to suspend their NEVI build-out, awaiting further guidance, and rescinded all previous guidance for NEVI implementation. But on May 22nd, 2025, Plug in America, along with a coalition of organizations and states, joined a lawsuit seeking to restore federal funds for NEVI charging stations. And then pretty soon after that, in August, the Federal Highway Administration again released interim final guidance for NEVI, which allowed states to submit new fiscal year 2026 plans following pretty simplified guidance, and allowed states to resume build out once their plans were approved. And then in September, the deadline passed for states to submit their plans, and the plans started to be approved almost immediately. And in November, when we made these slides, the fiscal year 2026 NEVI plans have been approved in all states except Florida, whose plan is pending approval. So we're super glad to see more movement on this program, since it had been pretty stalled previously. And we can go to the next slide. So to help everyone visualize the scale of the NEVI program and each state's progress, our team built a Google Maps system showing each announced station in blue, stations that have received funding, and each open and operational station in green. And the markers within the map have additional information such as the site host, could be like a hotel or gas station, how many charging ports are at each location, the charging provider, how much funding they received, and the exact or approximate street address. And please note that the vast majority of these sites obviously are just announced and not open, so don't use it to plan a road trip just yet, but I'm always excited to update this map every week and turn more of these dots to green and see more dots in other states. And I encourage anyone to explore the map and keep checking back for regular updates. And I will put the link to this map in the chat and hand it back over to Alexia.
Thanks. So one thing that we wanted to highlight is that while you plan for or finalize EV charging stations in your community, there is still the availability of the federal EV charging tax credit. This tax credit was passed as part of the Inflation Reduction Act to support EV charging deployment for a variety of different stakeholders, including individuals, businesses, and tax-exempt entities. And there are a few eligibility criteria, including that the charger must be in an eligible census tract, it must be new equipment, things of that like. And additionally, the one thing that we think is interesting about the EV charging tax credit is that the charging equipment can be actually bidirectional, meaning that the power can flow from the charger to the vehicle and from the vehicle back to the charger to the grid or some sort of energy storage system. So this credit can actually help bring down the cost of charging infrastructure, making it easier to deploy in your area. One big flag that we want to note is that to qualify for the EV charger tax credit, the charger must be operational by June 30th, 2026. And EV charging, like a lot of other infrastructure, can be slow to install. Among other things, you need to find a contractor, get appropriate permitting, and larger installations may need to wait a long time for things like utility energization. So it's good to get moving on these kinds of projects sooner rather than later. Kind of thinking about this timeline of the tax credit availability, it could be a really good fit for shovel-ready projects or projects that are close to finalization that you may not have previously considered the tax credit for. So we encourage you to visit our website. And on the next slide, we have some resources that are available there where you can actually dig into all of that different eligibility criteria, what you have to do as a potential applicant in order to access that credit. And we have various checklists that literally help you check all the boxes to make sure that you can access that credit. So visit our website, and depending on the kind of applicant that you are, we have a checklist that's specific to your case. So for the next slide, we'll actually get into the kind of meat of the presentation, thinking of with all that federal context in mind. We're now going to dig into several different state and local strategies for deploying EV charging. So next slide, please. So there's, as Jordan mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, there is quite a lot that states and local governments can do to support EV policy and specifically to support EV charging policy. And the following policy solutions, which I'll talk a little bit about, are all options for advancing EV charging in your area where you live and work. So starting with right to charge policies. These policies establish the right to charging regardless of where you live. So EV drivers who rent or live in multifamily housing or who live in communities with homeowners associations may face additional barriers to charging at home. They have generally less control over the property, and the relative complexity of installing charging at a multi-residential building can potentially deter EV adoption without dedicated efforts to address these charging inequities. And so cities and states can pursue what's called right to charge policies to remove restrictions that prevent the installation of EV charging at multifamily housing and other properties of this kind. Right to charge policies are a lower cost way that states and cities can advance EV charging. And these policies are on the rise across the country, which is crucial to further EV adoption for multifamily housing residents, renters, and other types of homeowners that need a little bit of additional support to be able to make sure that they have charging at home. And we'll dig into a couple of these examples later on of states that have actually pursued this kind of policy. Next, we have EV-friendly building codes, which are another cost-effective way for local governments to help promote EV adoption. These codes help to set minimum requirements for building design and help expand EV charging infrastructure in larger buildings like multifamily housing residences, workplaces, and other commercial properties. EV-friendly codes can save consumers thousands or tens of thousands of dollars, depending on the size of the project, and installation costs when you compare them to having to retrofit a building. So more cities and states are adopting codes like this that require new homes, buildings, and other parking structures to include basic EV charging infrastructure. Next, this one should look pretty familiar. Funding for EV charging infrastructure. This is a pretty long-standing strategy to support EV charging, and of course, a pretty effective one. States can support EV charging infrastructure by providing funding for various infrastructure needs in communities and along roadways across the state. Ongoing sources of funding like vehicle fees or other delivery fees can help to provide program stability, so you're not relying on year-to-year budget cycles. And we'll provide a couple of examples in how that funding can be guided to best utilize more limited budgets. Next, we have streamlining EV charger permitting. Overly complicated local permitting can really delay charging installation. Streamlining EV charger permitting is key to making sure that we can continue to accelerate the deployment of charging infrastructure, and simplifying this process can help to reduce these delays and costs, which will enable faster installation of chargers in both public and private spaces. And by making permits more accessible and predictable, cities can encourage more widespread adoption of EVs and ensure that charging stations are available to support both current EV drivers as well as future demand. Lastly, but certainly not least, we have what we've called innovative designs, which are kind of inclusive of streetlight, power pole, and bring your own cord charging solutions. These kinds of innovative charging solutions can increase access to EV charging, particularly in cities where you have potentially a lot more limited space. And cities and municipal utilities can accelerate development with city-owned stations. Curbside charging especially can help to leverage existing infrastructure like streetlights and power poles, which can support EV chargers with underused power capacity. And then things like the bring your own cord model, which is really common in Europe, offer a cost-effective option for US cities, allowing drivers to actually use their own cables and reducing station costs, things like sidewalk clutter and potential damage to cables. So we'll now look at a couple of these examples for some of these strategies. We don't have the time to dive into every single one of them, but as Kristen said, we'll leave our contact information and additional resources to support you as you strategize on your EV charging deployment in your area. So next slide, please. So starting with right to charge, Colorado and Illinois offer really good examples for robust right to charge policies. Starting off with Colorado, their policy protects both owners and renters, which is really key, making sure that all types of residents have the right to charge. And many right to charge policies simply reduce obstacles for property owners and or renters to install and use charging stations. And Colorado goes beyond to state that the primary purpose of this policy is to ensure that common interest communities provide their residents with what they call, quote, a meaningful opportunity to take advantage of the availability of plug-in electric vehicles, rather than creating artificial restrictions on the adoption of this promising technology. So it's a real commitment to making sure that residents in Colorado, regardless of where they live, actually have access to the right to charge. And Colorado strives to create this meaningful opportunity through strong policy language, as well as pairing it with financial opportunities. And its policies actually encourage communities to apply for grants from things like Colorado's EV grant fund to support deployment of EV charging. So it's pairing not just the right to charge, but also some funding support to make sure that various actors can actually act on this right. And then looking at Illinois, Illinois demonstrates a really strong policy as well. Illinois' policy also covers both property owners and renters. And the Illinois policy is notable also in that it includes EV capable parking requirements, meaning that a portion of parking spaces in any new or renovated residential development must be capable of EV charging. So this goes back to thinking about, something I said on the previous slide around thinking about building codes and really smart strategic infrastructure development. And this Illinois policy pairs two of these strategies where they're thinking through not just the right to charge, but how do we then make sure you actually have the technological capacity to do that? And Colorado and Illinois are not the only states to have passed this kind of policy. California, Connecticut, Oregon, as well as the District of Columbia have all passed policies protecting both owners and renters. And a variety of other states and local jurisdictions have pursued right to charge policies for property owners as well. So we're seeing some really positive movement when it comes to the deployment of these kinds of policies across the country. Next slide, please. So when it comes to innovative design, New York and LA offer really interesting examples here. Several cities are advancing innovative design strategies to increase EV chargers while solving for a variety of different hurdles. Cities have limited space, they've limited power capacity. Chargers, particularly traditional kind of really fast charging stations, can cost a lot of money and they can take a long time to install. And so some of these innovative designs solve for quite a few of these hurdles. And New York is actually working to convert lampposts across the city into lamppost EV chargers, which is really cool because these chargers utilize existing city infrastructure, which reduces installation costs and timelines. And additionally, the chargers fit within the city infrastructure to maximize valuable space and provide charging solutions where they are needed, since many drivers in New York rely on street parking. New York is also home to a company called It's Electric, which utilizes the bring your own cord model that I mentioned earlier for EV charging. The bring your own cord model offers several advantages, including providing options for drivers with different onboard connector ports and avoiding complicated cable management systems. These chargers can then be sleeker and slimmer, taking up less curbside space. And an additional benefit to the It's Electric model is that the chargers are actually powered with spare capacity from nearby buildings, which avoids the need for additional utility connection and reduces installation timelines. So when we look at LA actually provides another example of a city that has implemented an innovative strategy. Starting back, I believe, in 2017, LA partnered with Flow to install EV chargers on streetlights across the city. And these chargers utilize excess available power inside the streetlights, which again reduces the installation timelines and costs needed to set up what would be a traditional utility connection otherwise. So there are really many cities considering these solutions, in addition to Los Angeles and New York. Oak Park, Illinois, Kansas City, San Francisco, Boston, Detroit, and Jersey City have all decided to move forward with some sort of innovative curbside charging solution. So this is something we see as both really promising for deploying charging as fast as possible, but also in a lower cost way for drivers. So on our next slide, we talk a little bit about funding for EV charging. And I mentioned this before, it's not kind of this new avant-garde idea. But our last focus area offers a closer look at how states may choose to direct this funding for EV charging. Both of the programs you see listed on this slide are either currently or have previously been available in California and are funded through what's called the Clean Transportation Program, or the CTP for short. The CTP was authorized by legislation, and it's largely supported by annual vehicle registration fees. And additional legislation actually directed the relevant agency to conduct needs assessments to guide CTP funding and ensure that funding opportunities available through the program match the reality of needs across the state. And so two of those that were developed as a result are the Communities in Charge program and the Rev 2.0 program. And the Communities in Charge program is a block grant program that is now very highly focused on multifamily housing and related kind of community sites like congregations and schools. And notably, the program funds both level 1 and level 2 charging infrastructure. So, really offering a broad set of solutions for potential applicants and what kind of infrastructure they put, depending on their use case. Um, we think this program is pretty interesting because it's evolved over time to really narrow its focus into multifamily housing communities and other community locations, and has, like I said, changed over time depending on these various needs assessments. Another program that has come out of this kinds of needs assessment based work is the REV program, or the Rural EV Charging Program. And this is a grant program that, as the name might suggest, supports charging infrastructure in rural communities, with the stipulation that 50% of charging ports must be in what California considers to be, quote, disadvantaged or low income communities. And REV 2.0 actually supports both level 2 and DC fast charging infrastructure to address the longer distance that rural drivers often travel. So you're seeing here a pairing of use case with the program to make sure that the right type of charging is available for the use case of the driver who's expected to be using it. So we've just featured two of the suite of programs that are funded through the CTP to provide a look on how states can direct these kinds of dollars to communities, particularly communities that need it most, and get the most out of what is likely limited funding. Additionally, these programs address areas of charging needs that might not be easily fulfilled by private investment alone, which helps to strengthen the case for state and local support, and is part of why we selected to highlight them here today. So moving into the next set of slides, I'll pass it back to Jess to talk a little bit about a suite of solutions specifically for multifamily housing residents, which we conducted earlier this year.
Yeah, so as Alexi mentioned, I'm going to talk about a research project that we completed this year, which explores affordable and convenient charging solutions, really that could apply to anybody, but especially for multifamily housing residents who may not have access to charging at home. And we can go to the next slide. So for EV drivers who can charge at home, fueling your car for daily driving is super easy. You can plug in anytime, wake up to a full charge every morning. And according to our annual EV driver survey, the single most important economic driver of EV adoption is inexpensive home charging. But not all EV drivers can charge at home. Over 30% of housing in the US is considered multifamily, but less than 5% of home charging happens in multifamily housing. So there are some reasons why. Not all EV drivers can charge at home for some of the reasons that we mentioned during our right to charge section. Public charging is usually more expensive, and charging stations are not available in all areas. So we really set out to tackle the question of how can we best replicate the affordability, convenience, and reliability of home EV charging for those living in multifamily housing who may not have access to it. And we can go to the next slide. So Plug-in America set out to research this challenge and find some solutions to improve charging access and affordability. And first, the team compiled a huge list of any and all solutions we could find. These solutions are spread out across the US and came from companies, utilities, nonprofits, and state governments. And some of our favorites included chargers at local churches and nonprofits in Detroit, a city in Florida that provides free public charging, and a vehicle-to-grid charging program in multiple cities. But for our toolkit, we narrowed the solutions down to 20 programs that have a unique approach and are potentially scalable in other locations. And we did case studies and deep dives on these 20 programs. And we can go to the next slide to see some of that deep dive. So we included these in another element of our toolkit, which is the data matrix. And we interviewed some people involved in some of the programs to answer questions for many of the projects, such as where does the funding come from? How much does it cost EV drivers to charge? Did the project include affordable housing units? And are there any future-proofing strategies that the project used to keep the chargers viable over time? And when we weren't able to interview a representative from a project, we used publicly available information, usually on their website. And this matrix is available as a spreadsheet in our toolkit, and viewers can filter the columns to find projects that meet specific criteria out of any of our different categories that we tracked. And we can go to the next slide. So we sorted the solutions into four main larger categories so that policymakers and decision makers could easily identify which solutions would be most valuable for them. So the technology solutions were the most popular among the solutions that we found. And these are generally from companies selling their own charging technologies, from assistance with rewiring to load management. And these technologies are innovative and very effective, but they can sometimes incur additional costs. The policy solutions that we found, largely a lot of the same ones that Alexia had mentioned, were mostly at the state and city level, and they use government funding and resources to provide support directly to property owners and managers looking to install charging. And community solutions are often developed and implemented by local nonprofits and organizations that tend to focus on supporting EV drivers directly. And utilities across the country offer incentives and assistance with charger installation at multifamily housing. And we can go to the next slide to see some of the solutions that we ended up looking at more closely. So the map summarizes the geographical diversity of projects that we highlighted in our toolkit, including the 20 case studies, which are represented by the dots with the thick gray borders, and some additional projects. The solutions that we found are mainly concentrated in urban areas, especially California and the East Coast is just the pattern that we noticed. And we can go to the next slide. So we're just going to go through a few of our case studies that much more is available in our full report just to get a taste today. One of the community solution case studies that we really liked is from Ecology Action, which is a nonprofit supported by the California Energy Commission and the utility PG&E that offers full service assistance installing EV chargers. And to keep costs low, Ecology Action leverages incentives and often relies on level 1 and low power level 2 charging, which are offered at a reduced cost or free for qualified property owners. And community outreach to low and moderate income residents is a key component of the program. Ecology Action also offers bilingual assistance to reach more community members. And some additional categories that we put this program in. They support both public and private charging. The problems they address are mainly about access and equipment. And as I mentioned, this is a community charging solution, and they support both level 1 and level 2 charging. And we can go to the next slide. So a policy solution that we really liked is called Charge Vermont. It's a program funded by the state of Vermont and administered by the state's largest electric utility, Green Mountain Power. And this program covers up to 90% of project costs to install level 1 and level 2 charging in market rate multifamily housing, and up to 95% of costs for projects with a minimum of 50% affordable housing units. We were always happy to see these multifamily housing projects include affordable housing in the project design, which is also something we tracked in our matrix. And for Charge Vermont, the incentives can be stacked with utility program incentives and tax credits. And the bulk of the incentive is paid before construction begins, which eliminates barriers for property owners and managers. And again, some categories that we put this project in, again, they support both public and private charging. They address both the access and the cost, specifically the cost of charging installation. And again, it's a policy solution, and they also support both level 1 and level 2 charging installation. And we can go to the next slide for our last kind of taste of the case studies. So this is a technology solution. It's a collaboration between Blue Hub Capital and Fermata Energy in partnership with Eversource. And in Boston, Massachusetts, they demonstrated vehicle-to-grid charging as a way to offset electricity costs for charging. So through this program, there is a driver who lives in a multifamily housing apartment. And when this driver plugs in to his car and charges, Eversource, the utility, notifies Fermata when there are peak events on the grid where the grid really needs some extra energy, and the utility will pay to have electricity discharge from the vehicle back into the grid. And the driver receives free charging and a discounted lease on the electric vehicle. So again, some categories. The charging type is just private. The problems addressed were all three problems that we identified: access, equipment, and costs, specifically the cost of charging to the driver. And the solution type is technology, and the charger type is DC fast charging. So on the next slide, we just have some overall key takeaways from our deep dives and case studies into these different projects. specifically for multifamily housing residents. And some best practices that we found were to consider level 1 home charging. As Alexia mentioned, it can be very inexpensive and very easy to set up. And we recommend that projects should involve their local electric utility early to just get some extra help with the process. And we recommend that anyone looking to start a similar project should look for charging installation incentives. They should prioritize business models that reduce costs, try to implement load management and vehicle to grid charging for some extra revenue coming in or savings. And they should include local property owners and residents to create mutually beneficial solutions and ensure that you're putting chargers where people actually want them and will use them. And we recommend that projects should prioritize underserved communities and affordable housing locations whenever possible. And I will hand it back to Alexia for our last section here.
Thanks, Jess. So as you all heard, there's a lot of information that we covered in this past half hour or so. Imagine that we probably need a little bit of time to simmer on it, maybe dive in deeper on some of the topics that we covered. So we'll be sharing a few resources today, as well as our contact information with you later on, in order to make sure that as you think about some of the things that we shared, you can reach back out, refer to our resources. So if you could go to the next slide, please. There are a few we wanted to just highlight at the beginning, because these are some things that we mentioned earlier on, one of which is the affordable and convenient access to EV charging. That's the toolkit that Jess was just speaking about, which includes all those great resources around the data matrix, the solutions map, and the various different case studies that can offer pathways for how you might implement charging in your own community. The second resource we have here is the checklist that I mentioned for the EV charger federal tax credit to make sure that you're checking all those boxes so that you can actually access that tax credit if you have projects that are applicable. And then the last resource includes several of the other strategies, both that we covered today and that we didn't have the time to cover. It's called the Achieve Focus Guide. It's a document that we worked on with several other organizations that can also offer different pathways for you to think about EV charging in your community. So next slides, please. I think that's our last slide. Yeah, so we're happy to take any questions now, and we'll be dropping some links in the chat for you to kind of peruse at your leisure.
All righty, thank you so much. That was an amazing whirlwind of a presentation covering so much in not a lot of time. I really appreciate that. And I'll also just highlight that Alexia and Jess have been answering questions, typing out answers to questions in the Q&A related to where we're at in the NEVI plan, some other questions about condo and apartment charging that they covered in the presentation. And so feel free to check those out. We can go ahead and stop screen sharing now. We have about 10 minutes left for Q&A. So definitely feel free to ask those questions in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And we will get to those. There's one question here that we can start with. And I will pitch this to both Jess and Alexia. But so we have all of these policy options. We have state and local initiative examples, and you touched on these with some of your examples, but a big question that a lot of folks have is around funding for actually implementing these EV charging incentives and initiatives. And we have a question here about insights that could support states looking to tax EVs in a commensurate way to the gas fuel tax. And obviously, replacing the gas tax is a big issue right now. And so, yeah, just wondering if you have any insights on that, as well as any other insights on kind of funding mechanisms to support actually funding these EV charging policies. And we can go ahead and, there we go, stop screen sharing.
Yeah, no, great question. I think I just started to answer this via text in the chat, but happy to expand on that answer, certainly. Yes, we are aware of many states that are looking at various strategies to think through what is the kind of future of their road transportation funding look like. A lot of states have taken a variety of different approaches on this, and it's a really popular issue right now at the state level and also at the federal level. It's something that we work on pretty closely, and we think that, with the right guideposts and with the right structure, that it can be an effective way to make sure that EVs are paying their fair share into that road transportation funding, whether it's, pursuing a road user charge if a state chooses to do so, if it's an EV fee that they choose to pursue. There are a lot of different options and questions out there for what states might do when it comes to crafting this sort of funding mechanism. So the short answer is yes, we do think that this can be an effective way to make sure that EVs can pay into the system. But there are a lot of different considerations that have to be taken to make sure that it's crafted well, so that it's not penalizing EV drivers, and so that it's actually helping to make sure that the system is sustainable long term. I will pass it to Jess to see if she has anything additional on the kind of EV fees question.
Yeah, I think you pretty much covered it, Alessia. Expect to hear this come up a lot more and be really discussed and talked about, both on the federal and the state level. We're seeing lots of activity around this right now. So.
Yeah, and something I just want to highlight from the chat as well is we're definitely happy to have further conversations on this topic, especially given how much states are thinking about this and the variety of different approaches that we've seen.
Great, thank you. That's super helpful. I definitely think states are scrambling for funding on all fronts right now, of course, but definitely the concern about who's paying what and fairness and all of those things is definitely in the political will side of things, something very important to address. Um, we have another question here about streetlight related charging. So someone's asking, many streetlights are owned by the utility and leased by the community. Are you aware of any utilities allowing co-location for EV charger plugs? Any thoughts related to that?
I think specifically on various utilities, we'd have to come back to maybe a little bit more detail on the question as well. But we are aware of many cities that are pursuing this kind of strategy where they're working with a local utility, working with potentially a private investor or a private developer to come in and to kind of support that project from all sides. One thing that I think is really promising is that when thinking about kind of streetlight or power pole EV charging is that it costs a lot less. So you're reducing one of those big hurdles for, who moves first and how to get that charger into the ground. So it's a lot more open of a conversation than it might be if you were looking to put in a lot of DC fast chargers kind of in a parking lot in the middle of a city. But certainly we can come back to you on specific utilities that are kind of open to this.
Great, thanks. And yeah, I think you all I'm not sure if you sent your emails in the chat if you want to follow up with these folks, but you can also reach out to me and I can put you in connection with them. And okay, so we're coming up. We have about 5 minutes left. I this isn't an audience generated question, but it is one that I've kind of am pondering and have heard from states. So obviously, a lot of states are at different kind of stages of EV uptake. And are you guys seeing any trends of types of EV charging solutions that are more common or more kind of like low-hanging fruit for states that don't yet have a huge EV build out or a huge EV charging build out? Are there good have you noticed any kind of first steps that are easier for states to take if they don't necessarily have a ton of kind of political will for EVs or huge uptake in the market?
Yeah, I definitely think that some of these lower power charging solutions are really low hanging fruit. I think they really help to solve around a lot of the big hurdles when you think about EV charging, which are that they can take a really long time, that they can cost a lot of money, and then that there's, often questions around, where is the power going to come from on the grid? These lower power solutions are plenty sufficient for a lot of different driving use cases. even when you're thinking about level one. So that's one thing that I would definitely kind of double down on, is encouraging folks to think through level one charging solutions as some of that lower hanging fruit. It can really be as simple as, plugging into the outlet that you have either at home or in a, garage building, whatever, or a building garage, excuse me, what have you. Um, that makes it a lot easier to think through, how do I get EV charging into this place? It might already be there and you just, don't realize because it's a level one solution. It's not kind of, out in public the same way that level two and DC fast charging is. So that's one of the things that we think are kind of amongst the lower hanging fruit, so to speak. Another one that, we think is pretty helpful to think about across the board, whether you're talking about level one, level two, or DC fast, is just that permitting piece and making sure that there's not red tape built into the system inadvertently that prevents the deployment of EV charging. So thinking through how can EV charging permitting be considered as potentially a fast track permitting option. In a lot of areas, this might be a little bit more complicated than just thinking through, level one charging solutions, but is often a good way to think about, how can you address the overall umbrella of EV charging all in one go. But overall, one of the other things that I think we're thinking about quite a lot is, how do you work with what's already there? And there's a lot of solutions coming out, particularly when you think about curbside charging solutions where people are already parking their cars, where the car is going to sit for quite a while, that work with currently existing infrastructure that kind of reduce the opportunities for resistance around getting a project deployed. So really thinking about, where can you leverage currently existing infrastructure and streetlights and lampposts in building capacity or in power capacity that's already available on the grid in order to help to kind of advance your project on a faster timeline.
And I would also add, just to tie that back and address some of the other comments we got in the chat to Alexi's comment about the level one charging being a good option, to Stanislav's question about how do you address concerns about that EV charging is removing parking capacity from the site. I remember hearing about a company or perhaps a utility that was basically equipping all of the parking spaces in a certain building with smart outlets for level one charging. And it was really, really inexpensive. And I think that's the direction that I know Illinois and some other states are heading with, having new buildings and, retrofitted buildings to require them to have a certain number of EV charging capable parking spots. So I think that might be the direction we're headed, where maybe a majority of these parking spaces are, EV capable, even if necessarily an EV resident is not parking there. But that would definitely not have be a huge burden on parking capacity if pretty much anybody could do it, and those parking spaces were not necessarily only reserved for EV charging.
Great, thank you. We're coming up on the end of time, but there is one more question that I think that is in our Q&A, and I would love to get your thoughts on, related to um, guidance around maintaining EV charging infrastructure and required reliability performance, because that's also something we're hearing of folks who, okay, there's charging stations, but is it reliable? Is it even working? Those sorts of things. Any quick thoughts on that front? Even though it's not a quick question.
Yeah, no, I always laugh at thinking about this question because there's so much in this, but definitely appreciate thinking about this question. One of the things that I would say off the bat is that we're starting to see increasing attention towards the reliability piece, not just, how do we get these charging stations out as fast as possible, but how are we making sure they're working on an ongoing basis? And I will point you to one of the more recent examples we've seen, first of its kind in the US. California just passed a set of reliability regulations around EV charging requirements, including requirements for maintenance and kind of ongoing repair to make sure that the chargers are as reliable as they can be. I know the question itself referenced the NEVI standards as well. I think that also helped to put a kind of focus area on thinking about reliability issues and making sure that was a strong tenet of chargers that are being deployed. But I would also say that aside from policy solutions that can be pursued in order to help increase reliability, one thing that we are seeing happen is that as companies start to mature their technology, both on the vehicle side and the charging side, and there's more interplay between them, that the reliability is increasing overall. Because they're getting a better chance to communicate with one another. The systems are kind of better integrating. So it is slowly getting better on its own, but there are some policy opportunities that you can look to, like the California case I mentioned, to help guide your thinking around this. Definitely an important question.
Alrighty, thanks so much, Jess and Alexia. I think that honestly might be a record for Q&A questions answered in such a short amount of time. So I really appreciate your insights. I appreciate your time, appreciate the work you're doing. All of the information shared today, the PDF of the slides with links, the recording, and a little recap article will all be shared via email by the end of the week and posted to our deep dive archives, as with all of our webinars, which are all free and publicly available after the fact. So yeah, thanks everybody. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions, if you want to kind of talk to these experts on policy work you're doing in your state. And yeah, have a great rest of your day, and a great rest of your week in this crazy, hectic last month of the year. So yeah, bye y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.